This is the 8.1 liter, 496 cubic inch big block Chevy that propelled the ugly truck Silverado to a best quarter mile pass of 1092 at 125 miles an hour. Now, until today, this engine is unopened. We've never been on the inside. It literally came straight out of the junkyard, straight into the truck. We welded a turbo onto it and we made our best pass to date on an unopened junkyard engine. However, it is holding us back just a little bit, mainly due to a mismatch in the valve train components. So today, for the very first time, we are tearing apart our 8.1. We're going to inspect everything on the inside. Hopefully we don't find any damage, and then we'll prepare it for a new valve train that'll help the engine spin faster, produce more power, and possibly, maybe, with fingers crossed, propel the ugly truck to a 9-second pass. One of the biggest challenges that I face running the shop here is just finding enough time during the day to get everything done. And unfortunately for me, one of the first things that gets pushed off to the back burner is food. Most of the time for lunch, I just end up ordering in fast food delivery, or I'll snack on whatever I happen to have laying around the office, which admittedly is not the best meal. So those choices have kind of started to catch up to me. So recently, I decided to try something for lunch that's a little bit healthier, but also quick and delicious, and is simple enough to prepare that even I can do it. I've been trying out Factor recently, and I have no idea why I've waited so long, because this makes the perfect way to eat well, but not take up a bunch of time. With Factor, I can skip the grocery store, skip the meal prep, and skip the cleanup as well, all while still getting the flavor and nutrition I need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in only 2 minutes, so all I gotta do is heat and enjoy, and then I can quickly get back to work. Factor offers 34 chef-prepared and dietitian-approved weekly meal options featuring premium ingredients like broccoli, leeks, and asparagus. Plus, you can round out your meal with 45 different add-ons, including breakfast options like bacon and cheddar egg bites or the potato, bacon, and egg skillet. One great thing about Factor is they're flexible. So if I'm going to be out of town for a week or something like that, well, I can easily go online and adjust my delivery schedule. And they even have Protein Plus options with meals that have 30 grams or more of protein to help support your wellness goals. Also, the best part is if you're trying to cut back on takeout food costs, well, Factor is both cheaper and quicker than restaurant takeout since it only takes 2 minutes. Factor is definitely my go-to lunch solution when I'm stuck here at work and I've got a real busy day, but the best part is I actually start to feel a little bit better now that I'm eating healthier as well. So to learn more, visit factor75.com or click the link below this video and use the code Lawrence50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Once again, factor75.com or click the link below the video, use the code Lawrence50 to get 50% off your first Factor box.
Yeah, I probably just broke a toe or something.
It's all right, my foot cushioned the fall. No.
I don't see any signs of cracking. I don't see.
Yeah, because that right there, that's the supposed weak spot.
Here, it goes across this.
Yeah.
Which?
What's your finger?
Not this. Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got the block tore down to short block status. Cylinder heads are off, intake is off, most of the upper valve train is out. And so far, thankfully, everything we have found is actually in extremely, extremely good condition. Now, if you remember, part of the reason why I wanted to use this engine way back in 2020 when I first started this truck is because it was a less than popular or a less than desirable engine. Plus, I like big blocks. Now, one of the rumors about it was that the 8.1 was extremely, extremely weak, and that if you put anything more than like 4 or 5 pounds of boost through it, it would basically explode. Now, what we have found in here, by the way, background on this truck, we have run as much as 20 pounds of boost on ethanol with 20 degrees of timing. So definitely we were not easy on this engine by any stretch of the imagination. It down to like 800 horse at the wheels and 1100 and change torque. So anyway, that's what this engine has been through. Multiple quarter mile passes, multiple shenanigans on the street. So needless to say, we haven't been easy on this thing, but on the inside, it basically looks, I hate to say brand new, but I mean, on the pistons, for example, this spot right here, the edge of the valve relief, that is the weakest spot. And yeah, I have seen some damage there, but every single piston literally looks just like this one, pretty much brand new. The cylinder walls, they've got plenty of crosshatch in there. There's a few spots where it looks like maybe a little bit of rust has started to develop because I don't know how long this thing was sitting, but in terms of durability and, you know, braking from just overpowering the parts, I don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. And the same thing holds true over on this side. Like, every single piston looks just like this. Great cross hatching on the cylinder walls if we can get a good focus there. Yeah, I am extremely happy with what we have found so far. Now, I am going to pull the bottom end apart and see if the rods look the same, the bearings and all that good stuff. I'm debating whether or not to open up the ring gap. I probably should, or at the very least check it to make sure we have adequate clearance for, you know, elevated pressure and stuff like that. The only thing I've found so far that I don't like is actually something that's my own doing, and that has to do with the oil. It's definitely extremely like milky, like this stuff right here. You can see it basically looks like a milkshake. Now, at first thought, you might think, well, that's a head gasket, but it's actually because I ran ethanol in this thing last year and I never flushed it out. I haven't changed the oil in a very, very long time. I should have. And I don't have a functioning PCV system. And from what I understand, ethanol builds up a ton of moisture in it. Of course, you get the crankcase vapors and stuff that builds up. So you get that moisture in the oil. And because I didn't have a recirculating style of PCV system, that just is allowed to build up in the oil. Basically, I had an open breather. I modified this intake. You can check out the video. This was forever ago, but basically this guy right here is just an open port that goes directly down into the crankcase, but there is no active PCV on it at the moment. That is one thing that we're going to address. We're going to put a proper, like a -10 or a -12 PCV setup in this thing that does still recirculate. I'll need a check valve, catch can, and a couple other odds and ends to make it work properly, so we're recirculating fresh air through the crankcase and pulling any of that moisture out of the oil. So anyway, that's the only thing I found that I didn't like, but in terms of the engine holding up, so far, this 8.1 has been a rock star. Now, if this were an LS and we pulled this camshaft out, the #1 rule would be never look at the cam bearings because, well, you know, if you look at them, they're bad. It's not Pandora, but what's the Schrodinger? You never know until you actually look inside. That's the paradox. Anyway, well, the cam's got to come out. So let's take a look at the bearings and see what we got. Definitely no concerns about reusing those bearings whatsoever. So right now we have everything tore down as far as we really have to go. This is kind of like the bare minimum. We could, clean up the deck surface, get it ready for the new head gaskets, and not rebuild the heads, but put our new valve springs on, get the heads cleaned up, and then just kind of start putting stuff back together. But if you know me, we don't stop at just barely good enough. We're going to take this thing all the way. I want to completely disassemble it, and there's a few things that I'm looking for. Number one is ring gap. I want to measure each and every one of these piston rings just to make sure that we have adequate ring gap, because what will happen as you pump some heat in this engine with boost and cylinder pressure and all that good stuff that we love that makes power, those piston rings will expand, and ultimately the ends can just barely butt together, and if that happens, it'll cause the piston to drag in the bore, which causes damage to the pistons and scuffs the walls and all kinds of nasty stuff that we don't want to have happen. So to make sure that we don't run any risk of that, we're going to take all the pistons out, we're going to measure the gap in each and every one of them, open it up if necessary, or if the ring gap is fine, then we'll just clean everything up and put it back together. I also want to take a chance to inspect the bearings to make sure on the connecting rod specifically, where all that pressure from the piston pushing down, we want to make sure that hasn't distorted the bearings. Also, we want to make sure the crank bearings are good, the journals on the crankshaft are great. We want to give this a health checkup, clean it up thoroughly, because once again, this is a 140,000 mile motor, and then we'll put it back together. So I've got a new oil pump. I guess real quick, the parts list, I won't show you the specifics, but just a general overview of what we're doing. New oil pump, double row timing chain, new camshaft, of course. I'm going to reuse my lifters because they look in great shape. MLS head gaskets, ARP head bolts, roller rockers, different valve springs, adjustable, the adjustable studs for the roller rockers, probably different length push rods, and then I have a Railar intake I'm probably going to be throwing on this go around as well. It kind of all depends on how much time we have. There's a couple of events coming up at Bandimere that I would really, really love to attend. I don't know if we'll have time to get this back together, but that's the overview. So let's continue tearing this thing down and see what we find. Well, Teardown was going pretty good until just a few minutes ago, and now I am faced with a dilemma that pretty much every engine builder faces whenever they take something apart, hoping that it's a simple fix and they put it back together. The same dilemma that I faced with the 5.4 4-valve project that I started way back in the fall of last year, and that project kind of got mothballed for a little while. But the dilemma is, how far do you push that snowball down the hill? How big do you let it go? Here's the deal. The cylinder walls look great, the pistons look good, no damage up top, the cam bearings looked great. But the bearings on the connecting rods and the crankshaft definitely have some wear on them. Not catastrophic, it hasn't spun a bearing or anything like that, but it's definitely got some wear on it. And now I have to figure out, how far do I want to go? So let me give you a couple examples. I don't know what you'd call this, the pressure side, the connecting rods are pushing on the crankshaft. They've each got a fair amount of wear. This one here is the worst. This one, to me, you can see that groove in there, kind of looks like maybe a little bit of dirt got picked up in the oil at some point. But for the most part, they just look like standard wear when you combine 140,000 miles of operation with 20 pounds of boost. Definitely not easy on a stock bearing. Then we pulled the crankshaft out, and then things got a little bit serious, I guess you could say. So the main bearings back here, this is the worst, or the fifth cap is definitely the worst. You can see there's a little bit of a, I don't know if I would say material transfer, but that last cap, especially on this side over here, that right there, that almost is like something has been deposited onto the bearing or significantly worn through in that particular spot. And all of these definitely got a little bit of wear on them. So now I am faced with a dilemma. Crankshaft, it actually doesn't look so bad. Like most of the journals for the rods and the mains, you can kind of just barely catch your fingernail on them. So choices. I could either ignore all this, close my eyes, and just forget about it, lose a lot of sleep at night, and put this thing back together. Or I could try any number of combinations of sloppy sand all the way to full rebuild. I could get some new OEM bearings, have the crank maybe polished and just put the thing back together. I could get some aftermarket bearings. I could have the crank machined undersized, 10 thousandths under on the mains and the rods. I could just say, screw it, let's fully build this thing. Let's get an aftermarket crank, let's get some great rods, great pistons, and basically just use this block but build a whole nother engine inside of it. But I literally already have another 8.1 that's in the works. It's a solid roller 535 cubic inch motor that's going in the 4-wheel drive version of this truck. So I'm gonna have 2 trucks. And my original intent with this project was to keep the spirit of the junkyard 8.1 and see how far we could push it before things like the pistons and the rods failed. Now, my goal is not to make this fail, but inevitably that may happen. It's kind of a weird dilemma because I want to know, and I'm sure a lot of you guys want to know, how far will these parts go? Because we've already gone, 1092s, 800 horse to the wheels, 1,100 pounds of torque. And so far, other than that little weird stuff you saw in the bearings, the parts have held up pretty dang good, in my opinion. I don't know if some of those problems were existing before I boosted it, or if they're all my fault, essentially. So yeah, I have a bit of a dilemma. I got to figure out what I want to do. Let me know in the comments what you would do if this were your engine, whether we close our eyes, put it back together, and just ignore it and see what happens, or full send, in terms of the budget, which I don't really want to do, or some in-between compromise, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards. But let me know what you guys would do. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Have a good one.